Now, before we move to our next session, I would like to introduce you to a key player at Swiss Startup Days. I'm talking about the co-CEO who started this January, and she brings deep experience, a strong connection to Switzerland's innovation ecosystem, and a clear passion for building platforms where founders, investors, and ideas can truly meet and grow. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Gioia to the stage. So, you have been in the startup world for a good 2 decades now. How has it evolved, really? Because it has come a long way. How has it evolved, and where do we go from here?
You make me feel very old, but I have noticed I'm not the only one in the room, and it's great to see many young people, but it's also great to see people I've known for 2 decades plus. So yeah, 20 years ago, Switzerland already had brilliant science, we had amazing universities, we had strong engineering, but talking about startups, it was really still a niche thing, and founding a startup, like we just heard, was kind of a risky career choice, if not actually kind of seen as quite unreasonable. And of course, at Swissnex, where I spent a good decade and a half of my career, I had the chance, together with InnoSwiss and Gebot Rüff Foundation, shout out to Pascal von Mont, if she's still around, to build the first market entry camp for internationalization of Swiss startups abroad. And back then, the idea was really to encourage founders to start thinking globally early on and show that Swiss innovation could really truly compete on a global stage. Now, 20 years later, I think we've come a really far way. The situation is quite different. Now we have world-class founders. As we just saw, we have scale-ups, we have deep tech champions. We have a much more mature investor landscape, all of which are key ingredients to building this ecosystem at scale. So now the question is not so much whether Switzerland can produce startups, but how we can actually make sure we scale globally relevant companies. So yes, this is really what this is about.
But what is the role, really, of Swiss Startup Days and its partners?
Yes, so the Swiss Startup Days is almost as old as we just talked about. 25 years ago around, I believe, the Swiss Startup Days were founded. And it plays a very important role together with its partner, because those were the events and the partners that built this ecosystem that we see today. Swiss Startup Days, since the beginning, has been one of the few truly national platforms connecting the ecosystem across regions, across sectors, across ecosystems and actors with one shared ambition, the ambition to actually make Switzerland the innovation nation that it can be. And these partners, actually, that we still see here today in the room, outside, they're the partners who helped to build this ecosystem. And now we together want to shape this next chapter of the ecosystem, which means still the Swiss Startup Days wants to create the connections, the visibility, the trust, the networks that are required, and to actually spur the collective action required to solve the challenges of our time so we can build the startups of tomorrow that will address the challenges we all face.
Thank you so much. Now, Gioia, you will, of course, be taking care of an intriguing panel called Project Switzerland. And for those not familiar with Project Switzerland, the mission is clear, right? It is to connect the country's most promising scale-ups with the unicorn founders. The goal is we have some of the best founders in the world here in Switzerland, so the idea is that the next generation can also have access to them. With that said, and before I leave you to it, Gioia, let's bring it in with a memorable intro to this panel.
Thank you.
One of the biggest challenges of a scale-up founder is that you're often lonely. You're in the middle of people and you have advisors and you have coaches, but it's never at eye level.
To found a company, to kind of like create something out of nothing, that's a brutally hard job.
I have thought many times, this is not going to work. You are often 3 weeks away from bankruptcy, or you lose a big client, or an investor that you thought was going to invest says no.
What does it feel like to be a unicorn? It's an arbitrary mile marker. Obviously, on a personal level, it's kind of an insanely big number.
I felt the moment UniQuid made it, and a global iconic sports right holder took the decision to take us for a multi-year agreement.
As an entrepreneur, you're always riding the roller coaster.
Probably every entrepreneur could use more support. In some ways, it's a lonely journey.
The gap for early stage entrepreneurs to bigger global scale will be addressed by Project Switzerland, by bringing role models that have done it before.
It's important to also give back to help others avoid key mistakes that we have made in the years.
The Deep Tech Nation Switzerland initiative addresses exactly that we need to build platforms where people can interact.
Project Switzerland is the place where you learn to scale.
Where we're catalyzing the community of successful entrepreneurs and teams.
Project Switzerland is the place where ambitious tech founders meet founders that have scaled global companies and realize that they can do it too.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, we are talking about the next chapter in the ecosystem building here in Switzerland, and I think this is such a good example of what is required. It's not so much now about building companies, it's about scaling companies with global relevance. So thank you, all three of you, for being here. Cyril, I want to start with you. And we just heard what this is about, right? It's about matching founders that have gone through the journey of scaling a company globally with the future scalers, or the now scale-ups, to help them on this journey so they're less alone, they can learn from the best, and they can really have a smoother journey than maybe they were themselves at the time, right, Jean-Marc? So we heard a little bit from 21 Shares, and the thing, to me becomes really clear is that scaling is not just harder than starting a company, it's really a different game. Cyril, what is the moment when you realized that building a great product was no longer enough? And how did the mentoring relationship, and here for explanation, actually Jean-Marc is the mentor, Cyril is the mentee, how did this relationship actually help you understand things you wouldn't have seen otherwise?
Thanks for the question. I think it's not a binary flip where you suddenly wake up and believe, okay, that's a different game. It's a transformation, right? But when you observe the top of mind topics that bother you, they're completely different looking 3 years back to today, right? And I think that's a distance for us at least where it really shows that it is a different game. So when it was about building the product, you had completely different priorities in how you actually create the best technology, the best value out of the technology for your customers. And today it's more about how can I scale that as sustainable and also, of course, as fast as possible. So that means also something for where do you put your priorities? Is it more on the organizational design? Is it more on the people and culture side? Versus early days, it's really about, how do we solve that problem at first? And the relationship with Mark, to be very honest, we met today for the first long discussion, which was perfect. I mean, the program, the initiative is kicked off, a month ago, approximately. So that is really, it was really valuable because I think the difference in the role models we see in the program versus the coaches you have usually in the programs around is that these type of person have been where you are currently, and not just read about it or have some ideas of startup theory, but are really went through it, and that is with Jean-Marc perfectly resonating with me because he served quite a similar industry, quite a similar customer segment, which on top brings value for sparring with Jean-Marc.
Well, maybe then I'll follow up with you, Jean-Marc. Like, if you had access to you back then, what would you have done differently, or what mistakes would you have been able to avoid?
I hope I would have been able to avoid some serious mistakes. As it has been said several times here, startup, scale-up is a total type of business, right? When you start up, you struggle with what you know, right? Is your product, is your technology. Scale up with what you don't know. And the big danger is the you don't know trap, right? That's the big issue. And when you have access to people who've done it before, you have more chances of being made aware of some of the things you haven't thought about, you don't know, and you decrease the chances of actually facing one of these serious mistakes that you can make. So I wish I would have access to this type of service. Switzerland is quite rich in helping startup organizations, but the scale-up support is just starting, and I think this is a brilliant initiative.
So maybe I'll turn to you, Michael, since you're actually leading the initiative. Give us some numbers. What are we talking about here? How many mentors do we have? How many mentees? And is that a pool you plan to increase? And how do you plan to recycle this system?
Absolutely. So currently we have 22 role models. They're all serial entrepreneurs or unicorn founders. And we select every year up to 10 scale-ups. But as I said, we will increase that. Every year new 10 scale-ups will add it to the program, so this group will grow over time.
Okay. Cyril, what are you now hoping? So I realize now you just had your first meeting, right? So I'll pivot a little bit with my questions, but the first longer conversation, right? What is your hope, what you want to get out of this relationship that is really a gift to you, and how will you activate it in the most efficient and effective way for yourself?
And that is a good question, because usually you have the idea of having a structured approach to this type of knowledge, right? But for me, my experience is usually that you can talk an hour, or maybe you pick one tiny fragment out of the discussion that really changes the way you look at certain things. And in that specific example, that was just the case for myself. It was one topic that really helped me to reflect on a certain thing that is top of my mind since quite a while. And of course, you gain value of the whole hour we chatted, but it's hard to really, frame it as a structured approach. It's the discussion which matters, and my hope is that we can continue it in a regular basis. Of course, that is the idea. So we meet once a month, either virtually or physically, to just talk about things that I would be curious to learn, but also maybe to be challenged directly from Jean-Marc on certain topics.
Well, something that struck me in the conversations both this morning with Julia and Heike and just now with 21 Shares is it was very much a personal note in both conversations. Maybe much more personal than you would expect sort of a startup founder here on stage. And so now I'm wondering, of course you bring a lot of technical know-how, very specific skills, you understand the journey, so you'll be able to give very concrete advice, but how important do you think will be the human element in this whole connection and in this whole mentee-mentor relationship? And what do you think you can give to Cyril that you didn't have at the time?
When you're a founder, CEO, you have this lowliness of the CEO, right? You can't open up necessarily to the board, neither to your team. There is different support organizations that exist for that. But being able to talk with no barriers, totally openly, is extremely valuable for the entrepreneur. But in order to do that, you really need to have the trust to the person. And on the other way around, the coach really has to have the humility. I'm dealing with a guy who is super successful and super smart, right? So when there is the trust and the humility, the mask of egos goes down. And this is, I would say, but this is Cyril to say, this can really be very valuable. And me as a CEO and founder, I would really have loved to have access to that.
I can only add to that, that's the program foresees a matchmaking, so it's not just random. So I think if it doesn't match on a personal level, you could shortcut the exercise, right? So this is super crucial, because when trust is not here, you're better served if you read a book instead of wasting your time, right? And so if trust is here, you can get so much out of the conversations, which you likely will not find left or right so far.
That's why we have also introduced many role models to the scale-up. So they had many interaction in order to find out if it's kind of build up this trust with this person. So actually, it's not. They have access to all of them, and they pick the right one for them.
So it's not just about industry match.
No,
it's also about human match and chemistry at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And I think what I take out of this as well is, we're talking scale-ups, and we're talking about a very hand-picked, lucky few that get to benefit from this. But I think it's actually on any startup's journey a really wise idea to find some kind of mentor who can share personal experiences and the company and the journey. But maybe now to you, Michael. So Switzerland does have extraordinary talent and technology, as we know, but if we want to create more globally relevant companies like 21 Shares that we just heard, we need to normalize something that Silicon Valley, where I lived for a long time, has understood for a long time, which is that ambitious founders shouldn't build in isolation, and that we need that ecosystem. So what kind of founder ecosystem do we still need to build here in Switzerland, and what contribution does Project Switzerland
Actually,
make
we have
to that?
3 main goals with Project Switzerland. First of all, we want to increase the ambition. We can do it. We have great technology, great people, and maybe we have to bring together the right people so that you surround yourself with the ones, and this helps you also to increase your ambition. The second thing is that we transfer the knowledge from people who have done it. And the last thing, also promote the giving back and paying forward culture, which is super strong in the Silicon Valley, and I really believe in that. And if we can push that, we will create more successful companies. And I also think very successful companies are very important for an ecosystem as well, because they create return for the investors so they can invest again. Former employees start new companies. They also create a lot of knowledge how to scale companies. So we need the super successful companies. That they are the base for the next generation of successful companies as well.
It takes a village.
Yes.
So I will just alert you all that they will actually have their own session at 2:15 on scaling the next global market leaders in Panorama 4. So if you want to connect more and hear more about Project Switzerland, this is your place to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
And with that, I will give the word back to Ariane. Thank you.
Thank you.